All right, today we're going to dive into a really personal story, a 42-year journey with ADHD. And it's a story that I think a lot of you will find familiar. This long, winding road of not knowing what's going on, struggling to accept it, and figuring out the really complicated role of medication. So let's get right into it.
At the very heart of this journey is a question that so many people with ADHD and their families wrestle with. Can you actually manage this thing with just therapy and building skills? Or is medication a piece of the puzzle you just can't do without? We're going to really unpack one person's search for that answer. So this story doesn't start with a diagnosis. Nope. It starts with self-blame. For years, he just saw his constant struggles, the lack of focus, the impulsivity, as some kind of deep personal failing, a flaw in his character that he thought, I just have to fix this myself.
And you know, when blaming yourself gets exhausting, you start looking for other explanations. The challenges got reframed as some kind of spiritual weakness, or maybe a lack of faith, or even that other people's envy was causing it. These were all just ways to try and make sense of the chaos without understanding the real neurological reason behind it. And what's worse is that the world around him was basically saying the same thing. People called him lazy, undisciplined, told him he just wasn't trying hard enough. And that constant loop of misunderstanding and feeling like a failure, well, it's not just frustrating. For a lot of people, it's a straight line to clinical depression. But then there was a turning point, a huge shift. The whole story started to move away from blame and shame and toward real understanding, something grounded in science, and finally, acceptance.
The big breakthrough was finally accepting ADHD for what it actually is, a real, functional disability. It's not a character flaw. It's a neurological condition. It's how his brain was wired from the day he was born. And that realization, it changed absolutely everything.
A really powerful analogy helped make this click. Think about ADHD like type 1 diabetes. A person with type 1 diabetes needs to take insulin because their pancreas doesn't make it. You'd never tell them to just try harder to produce insulin, right? Well, in a similar way, a brain with ADHD often can't regulate dopamine properly and needs that external chemical support to function at its best.
Or here's another way to look at it. Eyeglasses. We don't think of glasses as a sign of weakness, do we? Of course not. They're just a tool that corrects a biological issue with vision. ADHD medication is the exact same idea. It's a tool that helps a brain function in a world that wasn't really built for its specific wiring. So, armed with this new understanding, what was it actually like to start the medication? This next part of the journey is all about what it feels like to finally build on solid ground. The effect was, well, it was profound. He describes it perfectly here. Medication finally put him on solid ground. Before, he said it felt like he was drowning in mud, just couldn't get any traction. The medication literally pulled him out of that mud and quieted the internal chaos for the very first time.
Now, this is a really important point. The medication wasn't a magic cure, not at all. It was the crucial first step. It created the stability, the quiet that was needed to finally focus, and with that focus, it suddenly became possible to actually learn and use all those behavioral skills and therapies that are so critical for managing ADHD long-term. It's the foundation you can finally build a life on.
And to really get why that stability is such a game changer, you have to understand what life was like before. An unmedicated ADHD brain can feel like it's in a constant, frantic search for dopamine. And this can show up in all sorts of ways. Risky behaviors, getting into extreme hobbies, making impulsive decisions, creating chaos in relationships, or even small addictions to things like shopping or energy drinks, anything to get that hit of a brain chemical you're missing. But right as he found this new stability, the journey took a totally unexpected turn. He had to move to a country where his medication just wasn't available. And suddenly, he was forced to figure out his ADHD all over again, but this time without that foundational support. So this incredibly challenging time became, well, an unintentional experiment. Without that chemical foundation he had come to depend on, he had to build entirely new coping mechanisms from the ground up, just out of pure necessity. It was a period of forced adaptation, of just trying to survive. And out of that incredibly difficult experience, he developed this powerful mental tool he calls the break the pattern technique. It's basically a four-step process. First, you observe your own behavior, almost like you're a scientist watching a subject. Second, you identify the negative loop you're stuck in. Third, you defy it. You challenge yourself to do the exact opposite. And fourth, you win. You get that little rush of natural dopamine that comes from taking back control. I mean, listen to how he describes the internal conversation. He'd recognize that familiar pattern of shutting down, of isolating himself, and the challenge inside his head becomes, I am going to break this cycle. I will get up and leave this room right now. And that one simple act of defiance, he says that feels like a huge win for his brain, and it helps build a new, healthier path forward.
So, after experiencing life with medication, and then without it, and then with it again, what's the big takeaway? Let's pull all these pieces of the journey together and look at a path forward.
Okay, the verdict, after all 42 years of this, is nuanced. He proved to himself that, yeah, coping without medication is possible, but it takes a monumental, almost superhuman amount of effort, 24/7. The reality is, for the vast majority of people with ADHD, medication is an essential tool. It's the most reliable foundation you can have for building a successful life.
Ultimately, the right path really depends on your specific situation. So if you have access to meds, the advice from this journey is clear. Use them as your foundation, and then build on that with therapy and new skills, preferably in a stable environment. If you're in the middle of a life crisis, though, focus on stabilizing your environment first. Medication just doesn't work as well when you're surrounded by chaos and trauma. And if you have no access to medication, then the path forward is all about radical self-awareness, using mental tools like we just talked about, and finding strong community support.
You know, this whole personal journey really shines a light on a much bigger challenge for all of us, and it leaves us with a really critical question to think about. Knowing just how vital support and understanding are, how can we, all of us, work to build communities that offer more genuine help and way less stigma for everyone living with ADHD?